Thank you, Shuan, and g'day everyone. It's great to be here and hear about all that fantastic work. I feel like a little bit of an imposter. I haven't worked much around Goulburn at all, but I've certainly worked on lots of farms, and I'm very passionate about rivers, creeks and wetlands. They're certainly the hot spots in the landscape for wildlife, and I was just sitting down there thinking, if you think of the ponds along the chain, or the swamps out there in the landscape, and then you think of the rivers and creeks, perhaps it's this beautiful necklace with jewels along it, throughout the area. This is where I camped just about 2 weeks ago, and it's one of those carbon-rich areas. It's the Grose River in the Blue Mountains near Blackheath. Fantastic habitat diversity. If you remember nothing else from my talk, just remember that this idea that messy is good means that habitat diversity equals more wildlife. This is from NASA, just the Friday before last, 14th of October. It's just an amazing situation that we're in now. You can see all the flooding through Barmah and the Werri Forest down in the Murray and the Low Bidgie. I think this might be Lake Cowell out near West Wyalong, and of course we're up here. It's such a perfect time to be talking about rivers and creeks and wetlands. This is the boom. We're in the midst of it. It's absolutely wonderful. Just last month I was a few hours west of here on a kayak, and it's happening. This swamp on this guy's farm has 250 of these pink-eared ducks nesting in the tree hollows. It's just absolutely brilliant. There's nothing better than the boom. You can see the little feathers just sticking out. And of course, just normally, because spring has sprung, a lot of the migrants are coming back from northern Australia, and even these sharp-tailed sandpipers are arriving from having bred in Russia. So it's an absolutely wonderful time of year. Things are warming up, and I know a lot of you, as soon as you hear the word reptiles, you think of eastern brown snakes and fear, but of course most reptile species around Goulburn are beautiful lizards like this southern marble gecko that likes those big old trees with all the bark. And I'd just like to put a plug in for the threatened painted honeyeater up there in the corner. It is dependent on mistletoe. All mistletoes in Australia are native, and they add to the habitat diversity. They're part of the mess, the beautiful mess. I've only got a couple of these, so fear not. I'll get back to the pretty pictures shortly. This is from the Tupple Creek from a few years ago. You can see it's woodland birds. The higher the score for habitat diversity or habitat complexity, the more species you have. It's really simple. It's not rocket science. You can extrapolate it to so many systems. It's one of the most solid ecological principles out there. The more habitat diversity, the more wildlife you have. If you want animals like Antechinus on your farm, maintain fallen timber. It's really that simple. And obviously there's the connectivity issues when those young leave the pouch and then leave the nest. If they've got somewhere to go without going across a wheat paddock or pasture where they leave themselves vulnerable to predators, then obviously that's where the populations are most likely to persist. These are the sorts of sites I'm talking about. I'm sure this is another carbon. Was it carbon rich? Yeah. Carbon rich. This is the Nema River, and in these areas we get them up around 12 individuals per hectare. Now, I used to do it with Dad as a kid in winter. We'd pile up all the sticks and fallen timber and burn them neat and tidy. I come from that school. Mum had a terrible time trying to keep the house neat and tidy, like so many homes. But it really is a mind, a shifting mindset that messy is good. And there's antechinus, there's bushstone curlews, there's so many reptiles that love fallen timber. And so it's a really good first candidate to talk about why messy is good. Fallen timber is really, really valuable, especially along creeks and rivers. No prizes for guessing which site we would find the swamp wallaby in. They're a lover of shrubs, and so are so many bird species. The difference between sites on farms with and without an understory is really quite staggering for these small birds. They love it. There's places to nest in. At the moment in my backyard I've got a shrub and there's a grey fantail nesting in it. Without the shrub it wouldn't be nesting there. And now there's really quite a threatened bird called a Gilbert's whistler, and again it's only in this river red gum area because of the understory, and it's in there nesting. Now, related to shrubs is revegetation. It's been a real privilege of mine to go on to many farms and see the response of wildlife to the trees and shrubs that people have planted through land care work. And I mean, what a great reward when you get something like a red-capped robin coming back. This site here at the time was only about 5 years old, and already there's 20 different species of bird that have responded. Even if it's isolated, because these small bush birds can fly, they're able to find it. But certainly they have a better chance if it's next to remnant vegetation. So you just increase the likelihood of getting birds coming back to your revegetation if it's next to a remnant area. Amazingly, some of these revegetation patches have better bird diversity than remnant vegetation. And why might that be? Shrubs, they're messier, better habitat diversity. But really, it astounds me. What was a paddock 10 or 20 years earlier with a couple of magpies maybe, red-rumped parrots, is now a hotspot for bird diversity. So it's easy to become optimistic about turning around the declines. And some of the real win-win situations I love about agricultural productivity and wildlife are things like this. This is a farm forestry plantation with an old man saltbush understory, so there's a great grazing benefit and obviously the timber later on, and in the meantime it's fantastic for these small bush birds. Does everyone know where Warcool is? West of Deniliquin. Again, we've looked at these woodland dependent birds here, like and that's a spelling mistake there I've just noticed. Dependant. These are woodland birds like the hooded robin, the red-capped robin, the grey fantail, the white-plumed honeyeater, these sort of birds. And it's not hard to see that the lighter areas might be where the vegetation along the creek is thinnest. That's certainly the case here. These darker areas are where the bigger patches of vegetation are. So all this sort of work helps us work out where our efforts are best spent to target. Look at this, is really quite staggering. This area of the Tupple Creek, it looked like that carbon poor photo that you showed earlier, compared to these beautiful sites up here with at least 8 or 10 of these woodland-dependent bird species. Just to finish off, lots more photos of some of the wonderful wildlife that you can attract to your section of the creek or river or to your wetland if you're willing to mess it up. I'll just point out a few. There's that crested shrike tit again. Don't be forgetting that one. The common bronzewing, the swamp wallaby, lesser long-eared bat. We've got a yellow-faced honeyeater, the good old wood gecko, and a few more. There's that mistletoe bird doing what it does best. I think it comes out within an hour, and it turns to the side so that the seed lands on the branch. This is a juvenile eastern brown snake, as opposed to these Dwyer's snakes up here that don't have that extra band. There's a bandicoot, striated pardalote. There's just so many species that are going to benefit from the wonderful work that this project's doing. Thank you very much. Questions? Yeah. Very recently, yeah. I'll just check for you. I'm 99% certain. Yeah. That's in New South Wales. Yeah. Staggering declines. Yeah. And it's really sad that some of these birds that were once so common are now on the threatened species list.
I just wanted to ask, rabbits are a big problem in a good season like this. You know, they love hollow logs.
Yep.
They love fallen timber. Do you have trouble with them out where you're working? I mean, or what do you recommend we do? We're all for the mess.
Yeah.
We're all for the wildlife.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, rabbits.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we do with them? Do we poison them? Do we just? I mean, of course we rip the burrows and things, but gee, they're incredibly sort of determined.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I wish I had an answer for you that that solved that problem, but it's just inevitable that when we when we create habitat and when we mess things up, that we're also going to harbour unwanted species, and getting around that isn't easy. And I think, there's been a really interesting couple of books written in the last year or two. I haven't read them yet, but I've read about them. And they're very philosophical, and they're about whether or not it's time to accept, to accept some weeds and some introduced species, simply because there's just, in all reality, there's not a lot we can do right across the landscape, broadly speaking. I don't have any simple solutions for you. It's just part. I think it's a small price to pay. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Maybe we can better fund CSIRO to come up with a new control.
Well, it's a great talk, mate. I just want to introduce rudely some of the politics of water and the collapse of the Murray-Darling Commission. If we can't get right the allocation, the economics of allocation, the small efforts like the projects we've been talking about won't make sense. I mean, the destruction of the Murray above the Hume is just shocking. And will we have rivered gums in the future if we can't work out how best to allocate water down the river, down those catchments?
Oh, gee. Have you got an hour? I think I know where you're coming from. My personal feeling is that, and this is big, I'll go big picture with you, is that the idea that we posit farming and the environment as separate. So when we think about managing water or managing land, we still do it. It's entrenched in government and NGOs and so on. I think that is stifling. So, for instance, I'm very interested in the water that's used in irrigation areas and how we might be able to maximise the biodiversity in that, rather than thinking of that water use as purely for economics and farming, and this water over here purely for the environment. I think in just a generation to come, in just a few decades, people will laugh that we were so simplistic with our ideas of managing land and water. And look, I'm all for reserves. I love national parks and spend time, and I think environmental water's fantastic. It's just that I think we need to think more strategically about the bigger picture. Does that touch on an answer for you? Yeah.
I just had a question about the slowing down question, because we have been working partly on planting up on our ridges on the theory that this will slow the water movement through the landscape, because we're very hilly and rocky. I don't know if there's any research that you know of that really supports how well that works.
Oh, look, it's been a long time since I've read it, but I think there's lots of research that supports that idea of slowing down water just in the way that you're doing. And it also might be in the gap between your planting and the waterway, with perennial grasses and more cover to slow it down as well. Yeah. Perhaps Xuan or someone else might be able to put you on to specific reports or papers. Yeah.